You would have seen in a lot of my previous videos, if I'm talking about the low end and bass in general, saying to you that you should definitely mono the bass, and anything under a certain amount, if it's monoed, then you get it tighter, it's in the center, and you're going to get this sort of more centralized kick, and everything's going to sound a little bit tighter. Essentially, yes, that is correct, and I still stand by that, what I say. You do get, and that comes from a vinyl world. That's where my head is when I'm mastering. I was taught how to cut vinyl, how to EQ for vinyl. I was taught by older guys that are older than me, would you believe, who are now retiring age, and they all only cut for vinyl really, because they were going through the 70s, 80s and 90s doing big records for vinyl, so they learnt to master for vinyl. Now all those things that they taught me for vinyl, and I think, can I say for vinyl anymore, but they're things that are for vinyl, actually work now for streaming and everything else, because the principles are the same. You don't want loads of tizzy top, which a lathe doesn't like. You don't want loads of out of phase wide bass, because a lathe doesn't like that. And that's all to do with the way the groove cuts, basically, and the speed at which the stylus travels as you're with vinyl. So everything that essentially makes a record sound good for vinyl does actually translate to making it a good sounding master. So going back to the bass, the reason why you mono the bass when you're cutting is because you don't want this, but the bass goes like this, the groove, should I say, the stylus is tracking through, and the groove is going like this as the bass gets wider and tighter. So what you want it tight so that it's just moving like this and holding the stylus in place. If it starts going like this, that basically makes the groove go like this, and as it comes in, if the stylus is going fast, it will pop out of the groove as it goes in. So that's essentially why you mono the bass when you're cutting. So that is why you get this really nice, tight, centralized sound. Now, something that I've noticed recently moving on from there is that because a lot of people know now, and especially in dance music, a lot of people know that you should mono the bass to get this tight bottom, from people like me saying it and other people around that they've talked to say, yeah, mono the bass under a certain amount. So yeah, essentially it's right, but because loads of people are doing that now, and when I'm getting a track into master, a lot of people have already done that in the mix. I tend to find that if I add EQ, but I don't mono that EQ that I'm adding, I can actually get this really kind of like boom, low end. It's not phasey, it's just kind of a little bit sturdier, should I say, in the low end, rather than being, it's still kind of mono-y, but by just adding a little bit of extra to the low end, it gives this kind of big hefty sound rather than it being weedy. And the problem you get when you mono a lot of bass, if you're doing it in a mastering scenario, because you're dealing with, if you imagine the frequency range is going like this and then you're monoing it down, I don't know if that's the reverse or what for when you're looking, but you understand what I mean. So we're going mono and then we're going stereo and then maybe a bit more stereo. So we're basically at this point, if you just leave it so it's there, it's kind of a thicker, stronger bass. And what happens is when you're going across, as you go up, wherever you've put this crossover point for where you're monoing, if you're still following, then basically you're going to then have this gradual build up which is happening around the low mids. Graphically, I hope you can see what I'm saying. So what happens is anything that's in the low mids, and the low mids are mega important for sound because that's where there's a lot of like kind of width and strength happening in the sound, and that's what, so you need to get those right, you need to get them clear. But if you start stripping the stereo information from there, suddenly everything's starting to sound a little bit thinner in the low mids, and that's a big issue because then you get a thin sounding track. And a lot of the times, if you can get that area sounding big and bulky but also clear and dynamic, you get a really strong sounding track that sounds super posh without having to add loads of top end on and thin it out. So by thinning the bass, by monoing it, too much, too high, you're going to end up with a thinner sound in the lower part of the snare, the lower part of the vocals, guitars, things like that, where all that information is happening around 400 to 200 hertz, something like that, maybe a bit lower. So if you are monoing the bass, I would suggest mono it under about 50 hertz, because by the times the curves come up, you'll be at 80 or 100, and then that's sorting the bass out. But a lot of the times, just see if you can get away with not monoing the bass, because a lot of the times you might just be doing a lot of stuff in mono anyway in the low end, and so there's no need for you to like strim it down and bring it in even tighter. It's not necessarily going to give you a tighter bass just because you're doing that. A lot of the time it might thin out places. So really, again, as I always say, you've got to use your ears, you've got to be able to hear what's going on in that low end. And then you can decide, okay, by me tightening that, is that actually giving that kind of whack to the sound, or is it actually taking too much away and making it a bit thinner? The main reason why I changed my mind, and the thing that taught me on this, was when I had a SSL Fusion in my room, and then I was playing with the stereo width and adding a little bit more rather than taking away, and I was thinking, that kind of works. That kind of gives it a little bit of a beefier sound. And so ever since I've been playing around with that, and that's where I've come to with this conclusion, that I can actually, just by poking it out a little bit instead of bringing it in, actually make the sound a little bit harder. On certain tracks, it's always track dependent, remember. It's always a genre thing. So dance music, generally in the centre. I never ever mono the bass on an indie track or a guitar track, just because there's a lot of information going on with kick drums and things like that. And yeah, if it's massively out of phase and sounding really weird, then of course. But a lot of the times I don't want to lose that low end of guitars and things. Pick what you can out of that video, and until next time, ask me any questions you like below and I'll be more than happy to answer. Okay, till next time, thanks for watching. Bye.